I call the member for Deakin.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. And firstly, can I thank the member for Goldstein for moving this motion, all of the speakers, also the Armenian National Committee for their work. This should not be an exceptional series of statements here today. As my colleague has just said, it is irrefutable that genocide occurred and was perpetrated on the Armenian people. It shouldn't be exceptional that we talk about that. It shouldn't be exceptional that we recognise that as a country. And indeed, on the 70th anniversary of the adoption of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment on the Crime of Genocide, it's absolutely certain that Australia will, and the sooner we do it, recognise this genocide. I'm very proud that we're one of the first to have become a signatory to this convention, but we've got to remind ourselves why we signed it. Why on earth did we sign up to that convention 70 years ago? And that's because we cannot, as a parliament, as Australians, we cannot be complicit in an act of genocide. And by allowing the denial of genocide, sadly, you become complicit to some extent. The genocide, in some respects, is still taking place. It takes the form of eradicating the last remnants of a people, their history and their memory. The Armenian Genocide Museum of America reports that in 1915, across the Ottoman Empire, the Armenian community maintained some 2,500 churches, 400 monasteries and 2,000 schools. As of 2015, only 34 churches and 18 schools remained in Turkey, nearly all of them in Istanbul. This effectively indicates the total eradication of the Armenian civilization in its historic homelands. But it doesn't end there. Turkey's sister state, Azerbaijan, has taken up this task, this very grim task of removing the last traces of the Armenian people from the region. From 1989 to 1994, the Armenian population of Azerbaijan's capital fell from 180,000 to under 100 people, from 10% to about 0.1%. And in the early 2000s, the Azeri government destroyed several thousand Armenian cross stones considered by UNESCO to be intangible pieces of cultural heritage. So let's not kid ourselves. This is continuing and it is still being perpetrated on the Armenian people. Now, our failure to recognise and appropriately condemn these acts of genocide, in a sense, create issues for us today. And many speakers have noted the genocide that has occurred against Christian and Yazidi minorities in the Middle East. How on earth are we to have credibility in standing up and fighting against an evil ideology as described by Daesh if we're unable to recognise the genocide, the most horrific genocide that occurred against the Armenian people? I've long thought, as there are in many countries laws that don't allow the denial of the Holocaust, that similar laws should apply in those jurisdictions with respect to the Armenian genocide. It's no different. Denying a genocide, that the grim genocide, as some members have spoken about what occurred, to deny that should be a breach of law because any decent person, any decent society should not allow it. Now, the member for Melbourne Ports remarked, and he stole my thunder to some extent here, on the denial of the Armenian genocide that was remarked upon by one of the most evil people in living history, Adolf Hitler, who asked, when trying to justify and argue for the Holocaust, who, after all, remembers the Armenians, when he was trying to convince people of his genocidal policies. That should be enough for every civilised society. That should be enough for us as a parliament. That should be enough for us as a country. And no amount of economic consequences, no amount of diplomacy should ever stop us from doing the decent thing as Australians and calling out the genocide for what it is. And if the consequences with governments and countries like Turkey or Azerbaijan means that economic consequences flow, I say so be it. because I know the Australian people will back this parliament all the way when taking that approach. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member for Deakin. Are there any more speakers for this motion?